everyone. Thanks for joining us again at the Football Diary podcast. It's great to have you with us. Now, it's been a season of unprecedented things going on, really, this time around, with COVID obviously disrupting football massively. And the war in Ukraine has had an effect as well. But I think this week is kind of one of the major changes of the way we see football with external factors, with the Chelsea situation. So they find themselves without an owner at the moment. Roman Abramovich has been there for 19 years and he's been sanctioned by the UK government, as we know. And that leaves Chelsea in a state of limbo, really. So they've lost their identity as a club. They can't buy anyone. They can't sell anyone. They can't find a buyer for the club just yet. So that's got to have an effect on the players, hasn't it? And I know, obviously, the situation in Ukraine overshadows anything that's going on at Chelsea. But I suppose you've got to remember this is a living, breathing English football institution that are the current European champions as well, let's not forget. So loads of things to kind of consider and their impact on English football going forward. So got these boys with me today, Myles and Dave. We get too political, but it was a shock to see Chelsea in this kind of state, isn't it? So I'll start with yourself, Myles. What is your thought on this as a fellow football fan? And also as somebody who's kind of only ever known the Abramovich era, really, in your lifetime?
It's funny because since we've started doing this podcast, even, there have been events take place within football that we've just never seen before and never would have anticipated seeing. Now, the last time I can remember a time like that was probably Abramovich taking over Chelsea, because at that point, I do remember it, at that point, that kind of money wasn't floating around the game, and they had this capability of just picking off whatever they wanted to. And now, seeing what that could lead to in terms of a fall for them, it's really hard to judge, because today it's Chelsea, tomorrow it could be Man City, the next day it could be Newcastle. Who knows where it extends to? I think it's hard to have much of a feeling towards it, even as a football fan, because I don't think any of us really know what this means still, because it's such a new scenario and something that football's never really been hit with, the government getting involved to this degree with sanctions like this. Do any of us know what it means for Chelsea? There are certain things that are being stated, the restrictions are clear, but this situation could be completely resolved in terms of a footballing aspect, at least, within a month or two, and then all of a sudden everything's fine again. But there is that fear of, well, what if it's not? The talk of some of the sanctions could have massive implications on Chelsea. I don't know how they're going to fulfill certain fixtures, for example. There's a real problem at the core of how football is organised, but you have to ask, you got to be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, what does a Chelsea fan want now? Because, I mean, it's a real test of the kind of ownership model that's become quite common in English football. And I think the Chelsea-Newcastle game at the weekend has been dubbed the sports washing derby, which is quite a low point, really, for English football, to see two clubs that have been run by mega super rich owners tied to questionable regimes as well, playing each other in English football. So many questions about ownership models going forward, how Chelsea look going forward. Some fans are seeing this as a potential new start for them, maybe a different identity from that of the Abramovich era, something a bit less guilty. I've seen some Chelsea fans saying they do feel genuine guilt about the way they've won trophies over the last few years and the money they've had invested in them and where it's come from and things like that. I don't think you can really feel that way, can you? I mean, it's nothing they can do about it. You still support your team regardless.
Well, you do. But do you have to be chanting Roman Abramovich's name while there's a minute of applause for Ukraine?
No, that is a minority, though. I think we've got to say that. On the whole, I think most Chelsea fans distance themselves from that kind of very hardcore, slightly racist Chelsea fan base. I mean, that's not the first time they've reared their head, to be fair. But exactly. It was in bad taste, wasn't it?
It is a club that unfortunately has had issues throughout modern history with their supporters and the way that they conduct themselves. I'm not saying that's all Chelsea fans. Of course it's not. And if this were my club, it would be... We've had this conversation about Newcastle even. If it's your club, you don't know how you'd react to this. And of course, you'd be devastated in some ways. And as a whole, Abramovich's reign has been incredibly successful for Chelsea. Yeah. They've won the European Cup twice in that time. And they're now one of the powerhouses in European football. But that just goes to show the Chelsea fans that are chanting his name show that sports washing works. Because, all right, all of these connections to Putin are still alleged and he still denies them. I think it's probably important that we say that. But if that's the way that they look at their owner and that's the way that they want to articulate themselves in that moment, no, that just says to me that it's been a success to bleed money into the club and get them to forget about where it comes from and your reputation. And now they find themselves in their own hole, unfortunately. It's a bizarre scenario.
I think the uncertainty around how they go about their business day to day is genuinely worrying for sort of the 1,000-odd people they've got on their payroll. Obviously, many of them just regular people. So that's a concern. And they can't even have the match day club shop open. They can't do catering. They've only got, I think, a £20,000 budget for away games, which I don't know how that's going to work for European ties. Yeah. But really strange times. And it's weird to see Chelsea sort of thinking about stripping back and spending less all of a sudden. And players probably looking elsewhere. I think Thomas Tuchel's only committed himself to the end of the season and said, yeah, I'll definitely see out the season. But beyond that, nobody knows. And Petr Cech, I think, is the only person from the club who's actually come out and said anything. And even he's completely in the dark. So, yeah, a lot of questions unanswered that I think that only the moment the government can kind of provide clarity on, because the amount of leeway they've given Chelsea, special dispensation, because they are a football club, has been limited. And I think for Chelsea to continue, they're going to need some more clarity on how much money they can spend, because they've got to keep paying the wages of all these people. I think it's a £28 million a month wage bill or something like that, which is, you can't carry on like that without taking any money. So something's got to give. And I'll go to you next, Dave, because as a fellow football fan, as a Manchester United fan as well, I'm sure you don't take any joy in seeing Chelsea going down this route of uncertainty. So what's your thoughts on it? Watching it from the outside looking in, do you feel concerned for Chelsea? Do you think they'll carry on? What's the future look like in your eyes?
Obviously, it's a precarious situation that they're in at the moment. I think there's been rumours today that we mentioned about, obviously, state-backed clubs and, fans feeling as though that, they've been very fortunate to have that sort of money invested into the club. I think there's been an official bid made by Saudi media group. I don't know the entire background of the company, but if that's true and obviously that materializes, then that would mean another Saudi-owned club, obviously with along with Newcastle. How that will, I'm not unsure whether they're linked or not, but if that would be allowed. But it would be interesting, really, again, to see how that works and how fans feel about that. And I think what you say there, Myles, is bang on. Really, I think it's kind of clouded the judgment, and I think fans' morals really over where this money does come from. And we've seen it with Newcastle, the purchase of those, and we've seen fans dressed in up as Saudis in the stands. And I think we're kind of obviously what they've gone through with Mike Ashley is really kind of brought them to the point of desperation where they are willing to be owned by pretty much anyone, to the point of where it is almost a little bit cringeworthy to look at on a lot of fans' behalf. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And again, it's a big mess, really. Obviously, with what's going on, it seems as though the government are determined and willing to kind of try and do what they can to ensure that Chelsea do get the buyout. Not necessarily just. I just hope that they're not going to. The club's not going to be willingly sold to kind of just any sort of anybody again, like you've mentioned there. And it's going to be somebody who's got the best interests of the club. I mean, it's going to be a concern surely for the players to that the club's going to be going in the right direction for the project that they signed up for, along with the staff and the manager. And obviously, you mentioned Tuchel. I'm sure he'll be keeping his eye on that at the end of the season and wondering sort of what the direction is going to be. And we've seen him already linked with other jobs. Man United, I think he's been linked with PSG again as well, potentially going back there at the end of the season. So, it blows your mind really, what everything that can happen from things that obviously going on around the world, and it's had a big impact in such a short space of time, and I suppose we'll see.
Dave makes a really good point as well about, okay, so you want to take the club out of Abramovich's hands. There is only a select few people across the world, realistically, who could take this club on now. Because like you say, Mike, their expenditure is absolutely extortionate. 28 million a month in playing staff wages that's immeasurable to most people's kind of wealth. So now who takes over? Because it could be equally as problematic. There's talk that they are now considering changing the fit and proper persons test to consider human rights, which is just it's laughable.
It's a bit late for that.
First of all, it's a bit late for that. Definitely, that's laughable. The second thing is that they're considering whether or not that should be done. That's also laughable. So a lot of this is really hard to judge. You say, Mike, how do you feel about this as a football fan? I don't know, because so much of it is subjective still. One of the big things that they've said is there might be a way to sell Chelsea still and get these new owners in, as long as Abramovich doesn't gain anything from it. But if you've got Chelsea fans still singing his name in the stands and he walks away with absolutely no money, but Chelsea get to live on with new owners and succeed, he's gained something. He's gained a favourable reputation amongst those fans again, which is a perfect example of what sports washing is. Yeah. Instead, people are going, oh, well, he's not that bad, is he? Because he let 1.5 billion go. He's gained popularity. So what do you mean by that? We can't sell the club if Abramovich gains anything, because in that case, they're stuffed.
Well, who gets the money then from a buyout? That's the question. Who does benefit from a sale of Chelsea? Who gets that money? Who are they selling it from, buying it from?
That's a really interesting question that there's not enough clarity on, really. No. And that's the same with a lot of these things. So, for example, 3 have come out and said, we want to remove ourselves from the shirt. The last 2 games, I've seen them, have you? Yeah. So I don't know what's happened there with that. There's talk that players are not going to be able to renew their contracts and cannot be sold either. But surely that's a violation of your contract. So right now, if I'm, let's say, Christian Pulisic, and I know that there's a big club interested in me, but because my owner is under UK government sanctions, I can't move my life somewhere else. Yeah. So all of a sudden, you're going to have players that might even want their contracts torn up within the club to try and get out in the summer. They already know that they will definitely lose Azpilicueta, Rudiger, and Christensen if these restrictions hold to the summer. And to be honest, they were probably going to lose those 3 anyway. But then what? Because Chelsea are being protected as a footballing institution and a pillar of their community, and rightfully so, because they existed long before Roman Abramovich was involved. But they've now dug themselves a hole because his involvement was so heavy. And this day would come. And it could well come for Man City one day. It could well come for Newcastle. But the problem is, the more frequently it comes, the more it starts to tear our game down. And that's going to be the problem, that now fans are having to pay for this and make moral decisions over their own clubs, which is just unnecessary. They're now saying that Chelsea fans cannot purchase tickets for games anymore. Well, okay, fine. You don't want the club to gain the money, but what about the experience for the young fans who want to go and see their club?
Just give them away, do the right thing. Fill the stadium.
100% give them away or do something, but there's no word on it yet. And it's just, once again, football has tied itself into these awful situations globally that then the everyday person who just appreciates the game has to pay for. And it's, I don't know, I find it so frustrating, because how often could we have these conversations about corruption within football and the problems that it then leads to? Because it feels like it's more and more frequent these days.
I think even if they were to sell tickets, even if they were to say, we're going to donate the money to, the Ukraine fund, to a cause that would make sense, that rather than just kind of let it go to waste, it seems nonsensical, really.
Yeah, I think if I was a Chelsea fan, I mean, I remember when Chelsea were, before the Roman Abramovich era, and they were still a sort of a top 6 Premier League team. And I think the season he took over, they still had a very sort of old Chelsea team, and the squad was very much like old Chelsea money. So they got to the Champions League semi-final, I think, and that was still a sign of where they were as a club. They didn't struggle without Abramovich's money, and I don't doubt they would have competed for the Premier League still without them. Obviously not to the extent of winning the Champions League twice, but that's the balancing act of morality as a football fan you kind of have, isn't it? Do I want my club to be moderately successful with moderate funds and kind of just try and achieve what we can honestly? Or do I want some billionaire owner? And the problem is now that Roman Abramovich's funds have kind of created a club that needs that money, and they need that money to keep coming in. So they've got a playing staff, like you said, that's costing them an absolute fortune. They've got a reputation now that's global. They're the current world club champions. They're current European champions. So they're not going to have somebody come in and buy them on a relatively cheap fee. This is going to be a mega sale, isn't it? Again, because that's what they are now. They're a huge club. And I just feel a bit romantic about the old times before they were taken over, because they were still good times. They were a very well-respected football club. That's kind of gone a bit now. The new Chelsea, well, I say new, the Roman Abramovich Chelsea is a very different identity. So what Chelsea will we see next, I guess? And will we see it in any more of a positive light? It all depends on who buys them.
Well, it could be. Thing, because the big difference is the infrastructure is there now in most cases. Obviously, they've not had a chance to improve the stadium, but Abramovich has spent the money. It's there. So things like, look at their academy system. We all moan about how many players Chelsea loan out every single year, but the revenue that then creates by developing and selling those players, that's a model that Chelsea have. Chelsea also have a global reputation now, like you just said. And they also have playing staff already that are big assets at the club. So the next person comes in, as long as they are wealthy, and let's be honest, anyone that's going to be able to buy a club like that they're going to be, they'll be fine. It probably won't change much about Chelsea now, because they're becoming more and more self-sustainable. Apparently, that 28 million wage bill is covered quite comfortably most months by Chelsea's revenue anyway. There are occasions where Abramovich has had to put his own hand in his pocket to cover the difference. But obviously, during a pandemic, that's really understandable as to why. But it means that now, actually, we could end up seeing a more positive Chelsea, because they'll come in, whoever the new owner is will come in as the saviour of Chelsea Football Club, won't have to spend the money to develop them like Abramovich did, and instead then can focus on the next steps. So I don't worry about Chelsea from any of this. And all these restrictions that we hear, how many times has this happened in football, where a massive story hits and we think it's the end of the world, and then things change overnight like that? Before a game, this was announced. So you never know what news is going to hit. It'll probably be sorted within 2-3 weeks. And all of a sudden, Azpilicueta will have signed a new contract, and they'll be being linked with signing Haaland in the summer or something mad. But right now, it needs to be a moment of reflection for football and football fans as to who do I want to be involved in my club? Because do I want to go through this stress and pressure again? And is it worth letting someone build this reputation under such questionable circumstances? Now that everyone knows what the term sports washing is, how are we still falling for it? That's the question that I don't understand.
I mean, it'd be interesting to know who's in charge of, analysing these bids that come in for the club. I mean, he mentioned that it will be placed into the hands of these trustees, but I've not got a great idea of who these are. And I think a lot of attention and care needs to be put into the bids that are being put in from these, the people, because if the club comes into the hands of people who've, there's a lot of controversy around humanitarian, disasters, and obviously everything that came with the Newcastle owners, and obviously Man City. I think it's really got to be carefully looked at, and hopefully the government will be able to have a bit of input over this, even though it's difficult to trust them with making the right decisions over things. Hopefully, on a moral and ethical point of view, the right decision can be made.
Well, we're going to move to the football side of it now, because we could talk on and on about the ramifications for Chelsea. it doesn't seem to be affecting them a huge amount in the short term. I mean, they beat Norwich in midweek, and they only just beat Newcastle in the said derby, sports washing derby at the weekend. And it was a lucky escape for Chelsea, I think it's fair to say. There was a definite clear shout for a penalty that I still can't understand why it wasn't given from Trevor Chalobah. He had a clear sort of grab onto Murphy's shirt, didn't he? And then Kai Havertz probably shouldn't have been on the pitch as well for an elbow, and he got a yellow for that. So some very questionable incidents, let's say. But they won the game with a moment of pure magic from Kai Havertz, who seems to be in a really rich vein of form at the minute, and more like the kind of player that we predicted he would be in the last few games, definitely for Chelsea, isn't he, Myles?
I was going to say, I think he's making a late run in to make us not look so foolish, Mike, isn't it? Because yeah, like you say, he's been in great form, and the goal was really well taken. He actually should have had another one. Like not long before that, he had a headed opportunity, and for a guy with as much aerial ability as Kai Havertz, you kind of expect him to bury that. But on the surface, this looks like a very basic win. But Newcastle, you've got to remember, have been in the best form they've been in as long as any of us can remember under Eddie Howe, really under resurgence. They obviously had a good win in midweek against Southampton with that wonderful Bruno Guimaraes goal as well. So this was a good time for Chelsea to beat Newcastle, as good as it will ever be, really. We know where Chelsea are going to finish in the league this season. They're going to finish third. But to be dealing with the off-the-pitch matters and then performing on the pitch and getting the points right now will be of great comfort to a lot of people. So a very professional win, I would say. You are right. They probably should have conceded the penalty to Trevor Chalobah, and Havertz maybe should have been sent off for his as well. But at the end of the day, you need the rub of the green sometimes, and they took their chance when they got it. And again, Timo Werner looked lively again, but just cannot keep himself on side. I can't understand a player of his pace needing to be behind the last man.
That's weird because he would have had a penalty as well if he'd have stayed on side, and it was quite a clear penalty as well.
He did well to win that penalty as well. When he's on the ball, it looks great, but he just cannot get his positioning right. It's bizarre.
So what do you make of Newcastle, Dave? Because they put together a really good run of form. They look out of danger now, and they actually gave Chelsea a really good game. And I like this team at the moment because Eddie Howe hasn't. I mean, he spent a lot of money in a short space of time, but they're on players that I think not many teams would have signed. Wouldn't have predicted they'd have signed Trippier, for example. He played well at the start when he was in. Guimaraes looks like a really decent player, doesn't he? And I think this team, as it is now, looks like a nice team to sort of root for. But I think that's obviously going to change when they start spending silly money in the future. But I like Eddie Howe. I like his approach. I like the way Newcastle have changed their approach. And it's good to see them competing against the likes of Chelsea, really, isn't it, in some ways?
I think, a few weeks ago, obviously, when Trippier got injured, we did wonder how the rest of the team would kind of respond to that, obviously, because you could see how much of a big player he was for them when he came to the team. Obviously, had a couple of match-winning moments. So, I mean, the fallout of that, we've seen actually Newcastle go from strength to strength, and the unity, I think, strikes me is... and obviously defending from the front, what I did notice with them against Chelsea is they're so intense in their press that they were kind of on the Chelsea defence straight away, and I feel as though they've got a lot of belief in themselves. Particularly, it seems whatever Eddie Howe's came in and obviously done and spoke to them, and he's instilled a belief in them and that they're able to get through this. And we've seen over the last few games, they've gone on this run, and you've got to give them a lot of credit. I think they were unfortunate not to get a result, a point at least against Chelsea. I think Chelsea at the moment, what we're seeing with them is, without being spectacular, they're getting the job done and they're getting the points that they need. Again, you don't know about if they finish third. Arsenal are certainly cranking up the pressure if they can win their games in hand. You never know. But I mean, you probably expect them to consolidate in that position, cement that position in third, and I think they'll do it pretty comfortably in the end, to be honest.
What goes beyond that is still unknown, obviously. But yeah, I think in terms of the football side of things, they've got things in their own hands, and they don't look like a bad team right now, even though everything that's going on around them seems to want them to kind of fail. They seem to be content to kind of just plow on and cement that top three, like you said. But in terms of that fourth spot, you mentioned Arsenal briefly, but United and Spurs played off against each other at the weekend. between a match between two teams that seemingly don't want fourth place from the recent form. It's just like win, loss, win, loss, win, loss for both of them, it feels like. But United came out on top on this particular occasion, Dave, and a Cristiano Ronaldo hat-trick for the first time since, I think it was 2008, we've seen that happen in the Premier League. He was brilliant, wasn't he, Ronaldo? He was really his best game in a United shirt since his return, I think. And he's had some good highlights, it's fair to say. What did United do differently this time? And where did Spurs come unstuck as well, Dave, in your opinion?
Yeah, 14 years separate his first and second hat-trick for United. His first against Newcastle. I remember that like it was yesterday. And
showing your age there.
In the glory days. And yeah, I mean, it definitely his best performance, as you say there. He looked a breath of fresh air, and I think Rangnick mentioned that, you know, maybe we should let him go back to Portugal for 2 or 3 break, you know, every time if this is how he's going to perform. And but yeah, I feel as though the performance itself, there were 2 or 3 good performances in there. One spectacular performance by Ronaldo, like you mentioned. He looked like he was chomping at the bit, and
yeah,
I think a lot of Roy Keane mentioned he looked like he was angry and out to kind of prove critics wrong, because obviously a lot had gone on in the last week, a lot of murmurs in the press about he'd been dropped for the Man City game, whether or not that was the case. He looked like he was out to prove people wrong, and he's come out and shown that a lot of people were saying, oh, he's finished and this and that, but he's clearly still got the ability in those moments. Fair enough, he might not be able to play 90 minutes every game. We even saw that in his last years at Real Madrid. He was getting subbed for, you know, he was getting benched for cup games, Copa del Rey games until the latter stages of the competition. So I don't see why. The only reason why I feel United can't bench him is because we don't have that many options. We've got Rashford, who's completely out of form. You've got obviously Alango's very young. It's a bit unfair to throw him straight in and expect, you know, the level of performance that we need to be getting these results. And Cavani's obviously been injured as well, so we've been in a bit of a mess on that front. So and there's rumours obviously that Ronaldo's been playing injured for a couple of months now with a hip flexor. So whether or not that's true or not is another thing. But I mean, the performance itself, we've seen that we've won. You know, we've had performances where we've played better and not got results this season. So Ronaldo is the main difference. We had Fred in there, who probably had one of his best games this season in midfield. I felt as though, and I just feel as though Fred is a better player in a box-to-box role rather than sit-in position. We've seen him in a pivot next to McTominay, especially during Solskjaer's reign. It just didn't look right, and we have seen a lot of Fred's better performances this season have been in, you know, those more advanced positions where he's able to link defense and attack. And I think he plays in a similar role for Brazil as well. Obviously Brazil have got, you know, Fabinho and Casemiro obviously sitting in there, so he doesn't need to perform in that role. He can operate a little bit further forward, and we've been able to see him kind of flourish in a little bit better where he's been able to link attacks and obviously chip in with a few goals this season. So fair play to him. You got to give him a lot of credit for putting in that performance. And Jadon Sancho, I feel like he's going strength to strength now. We're starting to see, you know, what he's capable of. And Rangnick did mention in his press conference, he seemed like he was trying to adapt to physicality and the intensity of the Premier League. And let's be honest, it's on a different level to the Bundesliga. But he's really starting to come into his own now. He's looking sharp, and I feel as though, you know, it almost sort of like he lacked a little bit of belief early on in the season, and I don't think it helped that Solskjaer benched him for so long and didn't give him the opportunities. Was continuing to play Rashford, who was out of sorts anyway. So there's a lot of positives in there. I feel as though the performance could have been better. Tottenham had their chances. We we were slightly fortunate in a couple of instances. De Gea made 2 or 3 good saves. How many times have we mentioned that this season? The goals themselves. Ronaldo's first one was brilliant. That was
magic.
A real, it was a real vintage Ronaldo goal. How many have we seen score those?
I think all of his goals were kind of elements of his game, weren't they? He had a really good towering header where he hung in the air for ages, and then a poacher's goal from a Sancho whip into the box. And I think
he did well to keep himself on side there. To be honest, I thought a lot of people thought that was offside on first view. I mean, it was very tight, but I've got to give a bit of a shout out to Alex Telles actually as well. He got an assist. He probably could have had another one. I think it was Ronaldo had one at the near post, was just saved. Apparently he could start midweek, so hopefully where this leaves Spurs though is the question, I suppose.
Well, I think United were soaking up a lot of pressure for the first part of the game. I thought Tottenham did really well and should have taken advantage of the momentum. And I think you said it last week, Myles, that Harry Maguire's under the microscope now. And I think with his own goal straight away, I was like, he's the headline again. Thankfully, it didn't end up being the case. But the gloating towards him, was it from Cristiano Romero when he turned the ball into his own goal? It was really odd. And I felt like Tottenham from that point on almost coasted a little bit. And got hit massively in the face with some karma, I think, from a United
that
response.
Was bizarre.
It's really weird.
As a fellow centre-back as well, and just as a professional footballer, that moment is a really awkward moment for him. You have to try and deal with it. That's happened. I thought it was awful. I'm really glad that United got the win just because of that moment, to be honest. It really did my head in. Dave was spot on with what he thought of United's performance. It wasn't that different to what we've seen United play like recently, but there were 3 wonderful performances in it that he's mentioned. But what I would say is I would still be worried about the defensive frailty, because it did look like when Spurs came forward, had they been a bit more purposeful, it was there for the taking. Maguire needs to not play a couple of games. Give him some time out of the limelight, rest him, let him collect himself a bit and take some of the pressure off him. Get Lindelof and Varane in there together just for a couple of games at least, because it's too much for him at the moment. He's making the wrong decisions at every moment. If he left the ball against Man City and it led to a goal, he played the ball against Tottenham when really if he'd left it, the guy running in would have been offside. He just hasn't got the right decision making right now because he just seems flustered by everything. So Spurs really have got to rue this and think that had they not been coming against a world-class player in Ronaldo, they should have got 3 points here, really, for the way that they played. But they just couldn't get it under control, it seemed.
Yeah, I think that's why. Go on, Dave.
Sorry, that way you mentioned there, Myles, actually is a good point. Then the Maguire in goal, we've seen it happen on a number of occasions this season where the attacker's been in offside position. There's a pass going into him. He's clearly had an effect on that phase of play. If Maguire misses, like you say, it goes through to him, it's offside. I'm sorry, but it's offside. It should be offside. And this rule that obviously that's in place at the moment says otherwise. But surely something needs to be changed, because we've seen it happen on a lot of occasions this season. Was it back end of last season? Obviously, the one with is it Man City Villa, wasn't it, with Mings?
Rodri.
Yeah, we've seen it over and over again. And for me, it's there's an intent there. You have an effect on play. It should be offside, and I just can't understand why it's not.
Well, it didn't matter in the end, thankfully. Again, I think Spurs' form is so inconsistent. I can't see them making any kind of charge for top 4 now. And to be honest, I don't think they deserve it. So it is United and Arsenal really head-to-head. Arsenal have a lot of games in hand, but that means nothing in the Premier League this season, I think. And I think Burnley are proof of that. But they're in some really good form. And I think once again, we've seen another Arsenal display where they didn't look under any kind of pressure. They didn't look like they were worried about losing the game. They really took the game to Leicester, beat them 2-0 in the end, and a customary corner conceded from them yet again. Myles, what the hell is going on with Arsenal at the minute? But then also, what the hell is going on with Leicester?
Leicester is such a weird side. I don't get it. Obviously, Leicester have got so much favour with so many football fans still, and I appreciate what they're trying to do. And there's been some players that have really stepped up this season and shown some really good form. Harvey Barnes has been brilliant again. James Maddison's looked loads better as well. But this defensive incapability at corners, it's baffling because I just don't understand how they've not addressed it by now. And fair play to Arsenal for taking advantage of it. It was a brilliant delivery by Martinelli. Partey got a really good connection to what he needed to do, and that was that. And after that point, you knew that Arsenal would see the win out. And how often have we been able to say that about an Arsenal side over the last few years? They went 1-0 up, and you were confident that they would either extend the lead or hold on to it. So, yeah, well done to Arsenal again. They are playing nice football. The midfield's starting to click a lot more, which is really encouraging for them. I still think that these games in hand will be the determining factor because they've got Chelsea, Liverpool, and Spurs. Yeah. And all right, we've just said that we don't trust Spurs' form, but in a North London derby, who knows? They obviously play Villa at the weekend as well. And I have the joy of watching that in a household full of Arsenal fans. Nia's family have very carefully planned a weekend together on the Arsenal Villa fixture. So you can all think of me this week. But they do look like they're on for fourth, which is great for them because in terms of Arteta's development, it's probably a little bit ahead of schedule as to where he anticipated to be this season. They invested in the summer, but if you look at the level of player they brought in, it wasn't Champions League quality, but they've developed together as a unit into something that could be. So it's a really interesting time for them. Another really good result. And now it's just whether they can get the results in the games that really matter across the rest of the season.
I think they've been shown to fall short against the bigger teams, haven't they? Man City have smashed them, Liverpool have smashed them. So it'd be interesting to see how they cope when they come up against another really tough opposition, isn't it? But what were you going to say, Dave, just then?
It'd be interesting to see what the record is for set pieces conceded. Because what did you say, Myles? It was 14 goals conceded from set pieces. That was a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a couple since, I think. It's ridiculous. There's a lot of records like that. I think Leeds have conceded more goals than any Premier League side ever has at this point in the season as well, which is just ridiculous.
But that's insane. I was going to say, go on, Dave.
I can't remember what I was going to say. You go.
No, I was going to say it was interesting because Leicester rested a lot of key players with the Europa Conference League in mind, and I've never thought I'd say that sentence at the start of the season because it's one of them competitions we still don't know how much importance it has winning it. But I think you look at the sides left in it, and Leicester are probably the clear favourite. I mean, there's Roma still in there, isn't there? There's Marseille.
Jose Mourinho and Tammy Abraham's Roma. Thank you very much.
Very inconsistent, though. I think Leicester, they are too, but I think they've got as much of a shout as anyone else.
I think to put Leicester's season into perspective, I think they're only 4 or 5 points ahead of Newcastle, which says everything really about how their season has transpired. It's and there's got to be a lot of worry, I think, from Leicester fans, especially. I've seen a lot of questioning Brendan Rodgers and kind of where he goes from here in the summer in particular, because there's so many players that are getting rumoured, and touted about to different clubs. Tielemans in particular. I'm sure there's a lot of players in there who are kind of their heads have been turned and wondering what's next. So it wouldn't surprise me if Brendan Rodgers left at the end of the season, and if they won the Conference League, that would be a good finish to the season, go out on a positive. And if there are players that do want to leave and want to leave the club, and it's going to be another huge rebuild club, because I feel as though their squad is probably not good enough anyway to get to where they feel like they want to be anyway. Sorry, go on, Mark.
You make a really good point about where Leicester's season is at and how you evaluate it, because all right, they're 4 points ahead, 3 points ahead of Newcastle, I think. But they're also they're 3 points behind Villa now. Now Leicester were aiming for Champions League this season, we can assume, because they came so close the last 2 seasons. Villa have sacked their manager at one point this season of fears of a relegation battle, and then they're 3 points ahead of Leicester. So Rodgers is quite fortunate that he built up so much credit, because there are clear tactical failings within Leicester that you can't label just at the players anymore. the one good thing that they've had over the last couple of weeks in terms of when you talk about building for the future is I think Fofana's just signed a new deal to keep him there till 2027. And he's obviously very highly rated, and they've missed him a lot this season. So at least there are some players kind of tying themselves down, which could encourage a bit more growth.
I think it helped probably that he's come back from an injury. I think you get a lot of big clubs, especially, off of the back of the Maguire purchase. They've probably been looking at 70 million to get him out of Leicester, going off of his performances before he did get injured. But they'll be looking to see if he's the same player after such a high-profile injury.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving on to the bottom end of the table, if you will. So looking at Leeds and Everton, they've been drawn into the relegation battle in recent weeks, but Leeds have taken action and replaced their manager. Everton have too. They've both had very different starts to their times at the club, respectively. So Jesse Marsh got his first win at Ellen Road, which was a fantastic, electric atmosphere, actually, for the game against Norwich, with a last-minute winner, very, very deep into injury time, which was, very fortunate as well. They hit the woodwork quite a lot. But then Everton have been dragged even further into the mire. And I don't know what Frank Lampard was thinking taking that job. We said, didn't we, what a gamble this is going to be for club and for him. But it doesn't look like it's paying off so far. Based on those two results, Myles, I think it's fair to say Everton are probably closer to the trapdoor than Leeds right now, aren't they?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Everton obviously have 3 games in hand over Leeds. But with the way their form is, what's a game in hand actually worth? Well, nothing, it feels like. They look awful, don't they? I mean, Leeds got their win against Norwich. And if you don't beat Norwich right now, you probably are going down, let's be 100% honest. I also watched Leeds play Villa in the week, and they were awful. It was so easy for Villa to take Leeds apart. So they really needed this. They really needed to pick themselves up. And when Norwich got that late equaliser, I mean, that was in the 91st minute. You really thought this isn't their season, and Leeds could get really dragged into this. And it would have been a great point for Norwich. But that sort of 94th minute winner and your manager's first win for you, that's the sort of thing that could lift the spirits of the camp enough to drive them out of that situation. Because they do have some good players there. Patrick Bamford's back now as well. And although we didn't score in this game, I thought he looked really impressive. Rafinha hit the bar twice and again, just showed what a quality player he is through spells of the game. So Everton look in a lot more trouble than Leeds, because even though on paper and based on some of their track records, you'd think Everton have got a few quality players in there. There's no sign of it at all. They just look woeful, to be honest.
It's weird because obviously Burnley have still got a couple of games in hand, but they're not taking advantage of any of them so far. Yeah. But Watford won again against Southampton as well. So it's not as clean cut as we started talking about a few weeks ago, but as it might be. Dave, are you changing your mind about that? Can you see Watford pulling back either Everton or Leeds into the conversation now?
I did say the other week, didn't I? I thought I've got a feeling Watford might somehow stay up, but I didn't know, we couldn't quite see where it was going to come from. But yeah, I mean, I'm surprised actually that they held on. I think what was really encouraging is Southampton pulled that goal back, and instantly when they scored that goal, I thought, this is going to be a real test of their nerve and mentality, being in that position and holding out for as long as they did. I think that's got to be a real positive for them and instill a lot of belief in that team. I'm not entirely sure how difficult their running is, but for all the teams there at the bottom, it's going to be a difficult, running, challenging, especially. I thought the Norwich Leeds game was a brilliant game, but it was the way Norwich conceded that goal again. That was ridiculous. On the balance of play, Leeds probably did deserve the victory. Obviously, on the balance of how many chances they had, But like you say there, Myles, if you're not beating Norwich, then you probably do deserve to go down, as bad as they have been this season. Leeds are definitely still down there, and they're in real difficulties, and we'll see how they do in the coming weeks, because we've just seen how easy teams have been able to beat them. And without difficulty, and to be fair, I think it goes a long way saying, as a United fan, I actually don't mind playing Leeds at the minute, because they're just the beating boys really of the league, and that's astounding. Saying that because they're not even at the bottom of the league. I think it goes to show there's a lot of teams at the bottom who are just so much weaker than the rest, and it really is going to be a test of who's not the best of a bad bunch, I suppose. What we've already.
Thankfully for them, it looks like that might be Brentford, because they were on such an awful run of form, and then they get a win against Burnley as well, they looked awful. I think when we talked about the relegation picture, it looked like we could assume Norwich and Watford were down, and you thought Sean Dyche's Burnley might just know how to get themselves out of it. Watching them at the weekend, I thought there's not a chance they'll get out of it. They're definitely championship quality. And all of a sudden, Watford, who were definitely down, are level on points with Everton. It's so tight all of a sudden. I think everyone's had this mentality of Everton are too big to go down. They brought in Dele Alli, they brought in Van der Beek, they've got Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin. They'll be fine. It's not fine. There aren't many games left now. Even Everton, with their games in hand, only have 12 games left of the season. I don't think that's a position they wanted to be in, where they're losing this often, that they are level on points with the bottom three now.
You mentioned their next 3 games are difficult as well, aren't they? Not easy.
They've not got a good run in at all, Everton. Not just their next 3, but across the end of the season, they have got some big games coming. So, oh dear.
No such thing as an easy game, but I mean, they've had some more winnable games recently, and they've just capitulated. So, and looking at the form and the momentum Leeds might get from a win like that, like you said, it might be the difference. But quick one I want to finish on for you guys. I didn't plan this in at the start, but it's just occurred to me. Liverpool beat a really poor-looking Brighton 2-0. Luis Diaz scored. He looks fantastic. Mo Salah scored a penalty. Kind of the new guard and the old guard, potentially. Now, Mo Salah hasn't signed a new deal yet, and apparently he's really eking out more money. And I think as a Liverpool fan, if I was supporting them, I would be like, well, surely you want to cement a legacy as a legend of this club. This is not going to look great if you drag out this contract. Imagine Salah leaving on a free next summer. That would be a terrible way to leave the club, wouldn't it? But it looks like it could happen. So what's your take on this? Is Salah right to ask for more? What's 50 grand a week between mega millionaire players at this stage of the game, Surely he just wants to cement a legacy as a Liverpool player now. I think he's, 30 this year? And he'll be 31 by the time his contract runs out, potentially. So what is he doing, Myles? What's he thinking?
It's his last big contract, isn't it? Because he's reaching that sort of age. And arguably, he is in the top 3 best players in the world right now. And he wants to be paid what that's worth. You've seen the wages that Ronaldo or Messi or Neymar, for example. Neymar's probably a better comparison, actually, have commanded over the years. It doesn't surprise me that he feels that he's in a position where that's his value. He won't go. He'll stay at Liverpool because he's made it very clear that he does love being there. He's not looking for a move. He's just looking to be paid what he thinks. And I think Liverpool will buckle. What might not work in his favour is Luis Diaz. He's looked absolutely fantastic since he's come in. And if he can continue developing in that way, they've already got Jota and Diaz as replacements for Mane and Firmino. If they're looking to bring that new school in, maybe they won't negotiate a deal with Salah. But then the idea is you've got to sell him this summer because you can't let him go on a free. You've got to make some money. But I don't think any of that will happen. He'll be a Liverpool player for a good few years yet.
But that's the thing. If you negotiate a massive deal like that at a club like Liverpool that are, to be fair, ran quite tightly compared to other clubs, they don't pay astronomical wages of 400k plus a week, So forcing their hand to do that surely is not in the best interest of Liverpool. And I think as a legacy thing, Salah shouldn't be thinking that way, surely.
I think Liverpool will be wary of, upsetting their wage structure. And I can see what Myles is saying, and that, it's unlikely that it will leave because of, the environment that he's in and how well set Liverpool look as a team, and they've the options that they have up front. They're fruitful in their options, especially in the attacking positions. But I think there comes a time as a club, I suppose, when you're looking at the longevity of Salah. Obviously, what is he, 29 now? Is he 30 next year or 30 end of this year?
30 this summer, yeah.
I suppose they'll be looking at that and thinking, you know, how long is he going to be able to give of his current level? And, you know, like you say, he's one of the best players in the world at the moment, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of teams that'll be interested. But how long a deal are they going to offer him if they are interested? Could it be 3 years with an option?
Reminds me of the Messi situation, because I mean, he could have stayed at Barcelona if he'd have took a pay cut. If his heart was in it, then why didn't he? Now look at him at PSG, completely soulless club, no prospect of winning the Champions League, getting booed by his own fans.
Hilarious.
I mean, Salah could find himself in a position where no one can afford him except a PSG, and he just sells his soul and plays for a club for mega money to see out his career. And what a sad end that would be for, you know, one of the most iconic players in the Premier League now. So it really is down to him what kind of legacy he wants to cement, and that's the kind of tipping point for me. Where does he go next? That's going to be really telling what kind of player he is.
Let me just flirt an idea that we all are kind of assuming that Kylian Mbappe is going to go to Real Madrid this summer, which will leave a hole in the PSG front line. But also, Liverpool have had a very vocal interest in Mbappe before, and he is available on a free. And there's not been much talk about this contract being sorted anytime soon. And PSG are a state. Who knows? Maybe Liverpool will use that as a bargaining chip. Okay, go and get your money elsewhere, and we'll bring in Kylian Mbappe to replace.
Well, I guess if they're going to pay that kind of money on a wage for Salah, why not just pay it for Mbappe instead with another, 15 years out of him potentially? So, yeah, you're right. Makes sense.
I think it's the worst kept secret that Mbappe's, you know, his dream move is Real Madrid. I can't see him going anywhere other than Real Madrid, to be honest.
Well,
as good as Liverpool are, I feel like it's looking like he's going to go to Real Madrid. If Real Madrid get Mbappe and Haaland, then that'll be ridiculous.
I agree with you. I imagine that's where he'll go. What I will say is the Champions League tie is done now, and he is available. You can have a pre-contract agreement with him, and nothing's been done yet. I'm surprised at that. And if the situation with Salah changes, I wonder whether they could convince him that a move to England would be better for his career at this point, because he could always move on to Madrid later on. True. Who knows?
Interesting one to end the podcast on this week. So thanks for your insight into that curveball that I threw at you guys. It's an interesting week of football this week because we've got European football returning, which we may talk about in a future pod. But beyond that, I think it's FA Cup weekend after that. So Premier League, there's very few games taking place, but we will be back next week. Make no mistake. We'll be here to talk about all the latest football news and goings on, and whatever situation Chelsea might find themselves in at that particular moment, we'll be keeping a close eye on. But in the meantime, thank you again for your time, guys. Appreciate you speaking to me again and having these conversations. And thank you for watching. If you can hit subscribe, that'd be a huge help for the channel growing going forward. So until then, speak to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, mate.